But here we go. Introduction. Conceptual relativism, CR henceforth, has been of great interest to philosophers for, among other things, its connection with a variety of other philosophical topics, which manifests itself in the extensive literature on alethic relativism, semantic relativism, ontological relativism, epistemic relativism, and cognitive relativism. Davidson's argument again, so this is conceptual relativism, which is based on an attack on the content scheme dualism, has been one of the most well-known ones. Oh my god, my voice. What is content scheme dualism? I'll have to tell. Okay, so there's a whole lot of references in this one footnote. Alethic is value-based. Oh, no. Alethic is, not value-based. It's truth-based. So that'd be truth relativism. That's all that alethic... Alethic just means truth. So aletheia is truth in Greek, or that's what we take it means. So you'll see dialetheism. So those are people who think things can be true or false. You'll see, if you go hang out with Luminance Bloom, he'll talk about aletheia in Heidegger, which is the clearing. That's Heidegger's version of the truth. So it's aletheia. Yeah. Oh dear, the introduction. What's wrong with the introduction? Yeah. So yeah, what's up, Valpo? Okay. So in this paper, see, we're just in this paper part of the paper. So in this paper, I'm going to concentrate on the plausibility of Davidson's claim that Quine holds on to the content scheme dualism, which Davidson calls the third dogma of empiricism, and that his argument against content relativism can thereby legitimately target Quine. I will argue that Davidson's objection is not successful since it rests on several misconstruals of Quine's early and later view of meaning and translation. Davidson's argument is backed with a factualist view of meaning, while Quine's indeterminacy thesis has already undermined the plausibility of any such view. I will also show that Quine, in his own way, has blocked the route to such a dogma in several amendments of his view. Moreover, I argue that Davidson's accusation that Quine maintains an illegitimate content scheme dualism would be unjustified because of his misrepresentation of the Quinean distinction between indeterminacy and underdetermination. A third dogma of empiricism in this economy? Exactly, Valpo. I mean, this is an argument between a lot of analytic philosophy. So it's analytic philosophy versus analytic philosophy. I don't expect anyone to actually give a shit about this, but I should consider tea and honey alongside the water. Wouldn't be a bad idea. Yeah. Because, like I say, in my daily life, I don't talk this much. So I talk the most I do on stream. I am not used to it. I do not have built up the strength in the vocal cords or whatever for this. Davidson against conceptual relativism. Following Davidson, I characterize conceptual relativism as the view that human beings directly contribute in constructing and shaping the world they live in via a deployment of their own conceptual schemes, the schemes that can differ massively to the extent of being mutually unintelligible. Davidson, however, thinks that conceptual relativism cannot be made intelligible. Okay, so this would be this is, I think, going back to the sort of Kantian pre-configuring of analytic philosophy. And wave at luminance. So you have the concepts that you shape your world by. Now, if someone has radically different concepts, then you would have a very different, their view of the world would be so different that maybe you couldn't communicate and it wouldn't be intelligible. So you can differ massively to the extent of being mutually unintelligible. This goes back to the Wittgenstein. If a lion could speak, we could not understand them, because the way the lion views the world would be so different from the way human views the world that even if the lion was speaking rationally, we would not be able to understand their rational speak, because it would just be such a different viewpoint that we have. Okay? So that's all that's going on here. The relativism of the background structure of how you see the things. Davidson's argument relies on several assumptions. First of all, he accepts the doctrine that associates have a language with having a language with having a conceptual scheme. Yeah, so they define this, that language has a conceptual scheme, okay? And that's what happens. So there is some background knowledge in the language. So they build this into their philosophy. I don't know if this is good. Okay, there are at least two reasons for such a claim in Davidson's works. One present in his famous paper on the very idea of a conceptual scheme, and the other, which I call the transcendental reason, in his later remarks on triangulation. According to the former, if having a conceptual scheme is not associated with having a language, the original problem is needlessly doubted, for then we would have to imagine the mind with its ordinary categories operating with the language with its organizing structure. Okay, so the language has its organizing structure, but then you're saying, well, that's what we're going to call the conceptual scheme. So just like, what do you mean it doesn't have a conceptual scheme? Because the language is already pre-structured. Again, I don't know if I should buy that, but still. However, those familiar with Davidson's later works on triangulation, externalism, and the holism of the mental can detect a second, more fundamental reason for this, according to which the emergence of thoughts and concepts necessarily require having a language, in that one needs to be in linguistic communication with at least another person like oneself. They must be in communication. Each of them must speak to the other and be understood by the other. Yeah, and this goes to the again, the Wittgensteinian public nature of language. Language is public. So if you are talking, you are not talking in an idiosyncratic way. You are talking in a way that other people can understand you. Otherwise, it's not what you call talking. You might be making some sound, but people are like, are you okay? What's up? Well, what are you saying? But then if you are talking in a way that other people can understand you. So there is some sort of convention that you are appealing to. See, for me, I'm going to go with convention, not some conceptual scheme. Like, I see the world differently than these folks. Davidson's second assumption concerns finding a criterion for detecting the degree of difference between conceptual schemes. For him, all understanding of the speech of another involves radical interpretation. The process of translation, that is pairing sentences with the same meaning. Again, you see, this is a particular view of what it is to speak and understand. You're pairing sentences with meanings. And that of interpretation, that is using a sentence to give the truth condition of another, have important differences, to some of which I will return. Yeah, so the author here is at least being somewhat careful. They're saying, look, how you actually get meanings and references, this is complicated. It is. Dojo says, I can communicate with a male lion, hungry, horny, need a nap. Yeah, female lion would be like trying to communicate with a female human. No idea? That's not true. Quite often they're hungry, and you can find out. May not know where they want to go for dinner, but they are often say they're hungry. Yeah, this is contentious. I know you're making a bit of a joke, Dojo, as was I, but like, what exactly is it to communicate across species, across like the aliens? I think Luminous was talking about this with reference to Kant. Like, what would a logical alien be? We were talking about this a few weeks ago. Yeah. So yeah. Durga says, haha, feeding me female pizzas, feeding your female pizzas as you speak. Yeah. So it's like, yeah. That's the thing. It's like, this is one of these, like, talk about the limits of what we can do rationally. And that gets really difficult. It just does. Like, there's lots of people talk about this, try to figure out what is the extent of our like, what can we communicate? What's the limit of our ability to communicate with each other? Who knows? Okay. But since Davidson's argument against conceptual relativism is primarily directed at Quine, he mostly focuses on the notion of translation, at least in the first part of his argument, which is also the focus of this paper, and then on interpretation, mainly in the second part. On the basis of the first assumption mentioned above, two people can be said to have radically or massively different conceptual schemes if one's language cannot be understood by the other. Yeah, so again, if you are a lion and I am a human, I can't understand cat, and cats might be able to understand English. I don't know. They usually are not thought to be able to understand English in any sophisticated way. This claim, together with the central thesis that translation for Quine and interpretation for Davidson constitutes the understanding the speech of others, amounts to the claim that two people's conceptual schemes are radically different if one's language cannot be translated into the other's. Yeah, and so they have a theory here. And I don't know if this theory is right, but like, they have a theory about what it is to communicate here. Douglas says, watched a stream this morning where Casey Muratori suggested that the reason that tech bros think that AI has progressed more than it has is because AI bros are on the spectrum. I don't want to call them on the spectrum, but I would say that maybe they don't really understand the extent of language and communication and all the stuff. I would say maybe that a lot of the people in upper management at these companies and other companies are really not that skilled. Linguistically, they're not that skilled at a lot of things. And so when they see the AI doing all this stuff, they think that is all that there is to human experience. And that's kind of pathetic on their part. And I'd say I feel bad for them, except they get paid huge amounts of money to do this. So they get compensated wonderfully, grandly, and they are terrible. Like, they're sort of deficient human beings. And that's why they think the AI is so good. Corporate speak is a thing, yeah. So, I told you guys I was at a event where I was dealing with a lot of vendors yesterday, and one of the vendors was saying, "Hey, do you remember this guy you used to work with?" I was like, "Yeah, I know him." And they were saying, "Oh, he's a good guy." I was like, "Yeah, he's a good guy." I started laughing and said, "He used to send the most juvenile emails, though." He did. Like, this old dude, he was writing like he was a 17-year-old. That was just really funny. Speaking of like non-corporate speak. But like, I was just like, yeah, that guy didn't do corporate speak. He didn't even do like professional speak. He did like fucking like immature, like, what the fuck are you doing, man? Level of like emails. I'm like, I hated getting emails from him. I'm like, I don't give a fuck about you having fun in your email. I just want the information, dude. You knew some people like that? Your mom. It is important to note that here the claim is not that since I cannot understand, for instance, Spanish or translate it, I thereby have a radically different conceptual scheme. Rather, an alien language belongs to a radically different conceptual scheme if it can be said to be untranslatable into my language. Yeah, and this is what we were Luminance was talking about with the Kant. This is a Kantian concept right here. Like, this is something Kant was concerned about. Like, could there be a logic that is so alien to us that is still rational, but we can't talk about it? Now, if Davidson can show that something cannot be called a language unless it can be viewed as in principle translatable into our own language, he can thereby show that translatability into a familiar tongue is a criterion of languagehood. This means that untranslatable languages cannot be intelligibly called languages at all, and thus we cannot view the idea that there being radically different conceptual schemes as an intelligible idea. One may object that this criterion is too strong. Yeah, there we go, Luminance Kant 5 head. But we should note that this is what Davidson is going to argue for. It is the conclusion rather than a premise of Davidson's argument that there is no hope for a criterion of languagehood that did not depend on or entail translatability into a familiar idiom. Yeah, and this is not a crazy thought that if some human is speaking, that you would be able to understand what they were given a translator. Like, yeah. And like, maybe you'd need a universal translator, but like, the idea is that given a universal translator, given a babblefish, then you could understand them. However that works. Now, if it's like mystical, a universal translator or a babblefish or whatever, like there's no like obvious mechanism that how it works, then maybe it is magic and you should be that would really be like it really isn't translatable because you have to do some non-rational process to translate the rational speak from one rationality to another. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, like this is like the Kantian precursors. Like this is why I'm bringing it up. NASA with the tampons, yeah. How would they know? There are no women that work at NASA. But they have to do research on it. But yeah, like there's a lot of Kantian precursors in analytic philosophy. I don't bring it up because I don't like Kant, but like that's one of the reasons I don't like it is a lot of analytic philosophy I don't like because I see the Kantian influence in it. It's like, what are you doing? It's just you assume there's this conceptual relativism or conceptual scheme. That's a Kantian thing where you're looking at the world through concepts. It's fucked up the entire 20th century. And probably the 1800s too. Davidson then attempts to show that the idea that there can be languages that completely or even partially fail to be translated into our own language is either unintelligible or philosophically uninteresting. My focus will be on the first part of his argument, that is his argument against the intelligibility of a complete failure of translatability, which goes as follows. Dokyo asks, what was the Star Trek episode where they had a reference language? I guess Vipers is looking it up. I don't know. I haven't seen. I think I watched most of like Star Trek: The Next Generation, but it was many years ago. I only saw it once. I do not remember. Languages at the referential level involving terms and predicates are taken to be organizing the world or the data that the speakers of those languages collected from. Yeah, so this is an organizational concept. So this is important. Jarmark and Jalada Tanagra. Okay. Dhaka, the walls fell. Okay, yeah. Energy says, I do think we see the world through concepts, but in a more complicated way than Kant described. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, you do definitely shape the world with some of the ideas you have, but I don't like the Kantian scheme of like these sort of like categories or concepts. I find that not good. Okay, David, you want to know why it was 3 pages? The link you provided is bad. Okay, so Davidson argues that the notion of organizing something is conceptually tied with the notion of a plurality of objects waiting to be organized. One second. We cannot attach a clear meaning to the notion of organizing a single object, the world nature, unless that object is understood to contain or consist in other objects. Yeah, is the only good part being affiliated with the university? Yeah, there are benefits. Like, there are. I was talking to people about, like, you know, things I don't have in being a university. I was like, I have no other philosophers to talk to in my daily life. And then one of them was like, yeah, I don't talk to my colleagues. Like, they have no idea what I get myself up to. I was like, oh, yeah. Like, academia sucks. Energy says, Davidson is interesting. I'm a fan of Quine and neo-pragmatism to some extent, but I believe Quine's naturalism has its limits. Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is like, these are very big names in philosophy and 20th century stuff. So it's like, you're in good company, I guess. Okay. For instance, we cannot organize an empty closet or the closet itself as a single object. There must be things in it, and thus more generally in the world, waiting to be organized by the terms and predicates of our languages. Davidson's claim is that languages that share such a common world, a shared ontology, or a similar plurality of objects would be similar to and hence translatable into our language. A language that organizes such entities must be a language very like our own. Such languages' terms talk about similar things in the world. Although it may be a difficult thing to do, translation is in principle possible, since it is possible to identify the similar objects to which we respond even though differently and which cause such responses. I mean, this is talking in very general stuff. I think most of this, I don't actually like this stuff. I think this is like, okay, this is setting up the Kantian, oh, there must be some sort of abstract concepts here, and how else would we ever communicate? I do not like this style of argumentation. Energy says, I think if animals had the cognitive capacity to speak, it would be in principle possible to translate them, since they are at least some shared qualia we'd have with them. Maybe, I don't know, but like that's kind of the argument here though. It's like, well, we'd have to have something in common, and it's not like this is a crazy argument. I was reading up on relevance logic, which says there has to be it has this rule where it's basically there has to be some shared variable, some shared objects when we're arguing using that kind of logic. That like the premises and the conclusions have to have shared some sort of shared objects in common. But like it's not crazy, but the question is, what are you really going to get out of that? And I don't like arguments that are just like, well, there must be something. It's like, fuck you. Like, there must be anything that we talk about. Just because you want an answer doesn't mean we're going to have an answer that's any good. You're making stuff up a lot of times. That's the sort of thing that I think is going on in these sorts of arguments. I don't like them. Okay. Languages at the level of their whole senses are taken by Davidson to have the property of fitting, coping with, explaining, or predicting the world. At this stage, Davidson focuses on theories, or to borrow Quine's terminology, are total theories of the world. His concern is now redirected to the relationship between such theories and evidence. The early Quine has claimed that his conformational holism lends credence to the epistemological doctrine of the underdetermination of theory by evidence. I distinguish between early and the later Quine because, as we will see in more detail, he has changed his view of these theses of indeterminacy and underdetermination. As the early Quine puts it, theories can be logically incompatible and empirically equivalent. According to such a strong version of underdetermination, we can have logically incompatible theories of the world. Nevertheless, this doctrine does not lead to any constitutive skepticism regarding truths about the world, since once one such undetermined theory is favored over the other, the totality of facts about the world is settled within that theory. Theory in physics is an ultimate parameter. There is no legitimate first philosophy higher or firmer than physics. This naturalistic attitude, as we will see, never disappears in Quine's later works on the topic. I also use the term constitutive skepticism as a claim different from epistemological skepticism. But by this distinction, I have the following two types of skepticism in mind. A constitutive skepticism aims to undermine claims about the existence of something, to deny that there is any fact about the subject matter under consideration. With regard to the notion of meaning, a constitutive skepticism, such as Quine and Kripke's Wittgenstein from 1982, the Kripkenstein, if you will, is an argument with the skeptical conclusion that there is no fact of the matter about meaning something determinate by a word. By an epistemological skepticism, however, I mean arguments with a conclusion along these lines, that we cannot really know what a speaker actually means, that human beings lack the epistemic powers needed to capture facts about meaning, and so on. Yeah, so one is saying, well, do we actually know what a word refers to? Well, you can cash that out in lots of different ways. You can't always be sure. Can we understand what someone else means? That's a different thing. It's not skepticism about word meanings or sentence meanings. Skepticism about what people are up to. Yeah. In these sorts of claims, it is not denied that there are facts about meanings, rather that we, the subjects, are argued to be never entitled to claim that we know the determinate meaning the speaker has in mind. A constitutive skepticism is not concerned with such claims. For instance, Kripke's Wittgenstein says that whatever looking into my mind may be, the skeptic asserts that even if God were to do it, he could still not determine that I meant addition by plus. His skeptic makes such a claim because he argues that there is no fact about meaning to be found at all. Quine's indeterminacy thesis aims to establish a conclusion along these lines, while his doctrine of underdetermination only makes the previous sort of epistemological claim. Yeah, so either there is no meaning at all, or there is meaning, but we don't know what meanings people are using. There's two different things there. Fair enough. Davidson, on the basis of his reading of Quine's underdetermination thesis, claims that the underdetermination results in the conclusion that for a theory to fit or face up to the totality of possible sensory evidence is for that theory to be true. Two such theories, T1 and T2, can both be compatible with the set of all possible data. According to Davidson, we can then count both T1 and T2 as true theories. Well, Dogma says American addresses are based on street numbers and names. Japan addresses are based on a hierarchy of blocks and buildings. If you extend this idea to the morphology of how we describe things, I think it is easy to assume that there may be untranslatable concepts. I say that's a tree. What do you call trees? And another person can distinguish every species and tree calls it something else. Yeah, people are doing it very differently. People always say that there's ideas in like other languages that are just very hard to capture when translated. I mean, that's possible. Like it seems very possible. And there may be stuff that's like captured by like a whole world view. And so like only people from like certain area, kind of like an inside joke, only certain people get it because you only had certain experiences, and then like other things that refer to that, well, other people haven't had that experience, so you can't refer to it. Maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. So this is hard. Now, if you go live in Japan for long enough, I assume you could pick up enough about the culture to say, okay, I get what is going on here. English puns are only puns in English. Yeah. So it's like you have to get a lot. And so I think the idea is like they're generalizing from this idea that the background knowledge you require to understand certain things can be so great that other people can't understand it. Now, it seems weird that like I couldn't go live in Japan for long enough and get most of what they're talking about. Maybe there's things you really have to grow up with, but that seems excessive to say that like, yeah, the growing up Japanese is like going to severely restrict other people from understanding their experiences. Like I doubt that. I mean, I've heard the claim that, like, here in the United States, like, black Americans' experience is very different from white Americans' experience, because it's just like institutions treat the people so differently. And it's like, okay, but like, we're still here, and like, you can tell me stuff. It's not that we're so far away. It's like, I don't, like, may not inherently get it. And this is actually why I like standpoint epistemology. Lots of people may not see what other people see because they are not enculturated or don't have the same institutional understanding or whatever it is. It doesn't mean they can't be pointed out to other people. Like, yeah, you can point shit out. What standpoint epistemology? That comes out of feminist and like other epistemologies, like the non-traditional ones. That's basically saying that you need to have a certain like history and background to understand certain aspects of our world, like in the right way. So if, like, say you're in a wheelchair and then you're trying to move around the city compared to, like, or a campus or something, say you're on like a campus or a city, you're going to understand the accessibility and how that affects people in wheelchairs much more than someone who's never been in a wheelchair before. Now, of course, someone can see, okay, yeah, there is no ramp in this place. But again, are you going to, if you haven't been in a wheelchair, understand like the different kinds of ramps, how different sort of like, surfaces affect wheelchairs, things like that. And so it's like people who have no experience in a wheelchair are not going to experience what, like, the world is like trying to move around in a wheelchair. So that's different. You learn things about how you interact with the world differently when you move in the world differently. And so it develops the idea that there's knowledge to be gained by having different histories and differences between people. Yeah. So, I mean, traditional epistemology, of course, is just like justify true belief. And so if you can justify it, then it's knowledge, and if not, then not. But like, it doesn't talk about knowledge generation at all. Things like that. I think that stuff is important. Anyway, let's get back to this. I got to read fast. Time is it already? Yeah. So now the relativist claim turns into the claim that while the two theories can both be true, they can still be radically different, that is untranslatable into each other. Davidson's objection is that the concept of truth and that of translation are inseparable. See, this is what I was talking about. This is the one person's modus tollens is the other's modus ponens. Davidson's putting his foot down here. Translation is truth. You can't separate them. Since Tarski's convention T embodies, so T means it's true just if it's like the sentence, like, so P is true just if and only if P. So some proposition is true, you can say that is P. That's just how you do it. And two, this definition makes an essential use of the notion of translation into a language we know. Yeah, so truth of the sentence T is translated as just the truth of T. Davidson concludes that we cannot find a criterion for identifying a radical difference between conceptual schemes, which depends on the assumption that we can divorce the notion of truth from that of translation. This means that either we cannot talk about the truth of any theory, or if we can, we have already assumed that such underdetermined theories are intertranslatable. For the rest of this paper, I concentrate on this part of Davidson's argument. The second part of the argument, that is his argument against the partial failure of translatability, relies on viewing the principle of charity as a necessary condition on the possibility of interpretation. Charity implies that the interpreter does her best to maximize the intelligibility in the subject's behavior. This is possible only if the interpreter can find a large degree of agreement in beliefs between the speaker and herself. On this basis, Davidson concludes that either we fail to find such an agreement in beliefs and thereby fail to attribute rationality to the subject, in which case we have no reason to treat the subject as a rational agent speaking any language at all, or if we have been able to start translating her speech, the application of the principle of charity would block the emergence of any massive disagreement in beliefs and thus guarantee the translatability of the speaker's whole language. Hey, what's up, Koss? How you doing? The occasional local failures in translation should then be treated as a philosophically uninteresting phenomena happening all the time, even in our own familiar language. Quine would agree with Davidson on this point, as he says there are also plenty of cases of untranslatable sentences, and they are commonplace even within our own language. Let me return to Davidson's remarks on the complete failure of translatability. As Davidson clarifies, his main concern is not occasional local failures of translatability. Rather, the trouble comes when we try to embrace the idea that there might be more comprehensive differences between conceptual schemes, for this seems absurdly to ask us to take up a stance outside of our own ways of thought. Yeah, the idea is like, how would you even conceive of someone using concepts completely different from your own? Can't even talk about that. I mean, does that even make sense? And that's the point, is like, you can't even make sense of that because you have to only use the concepts you have. This conclusion is very close to the core idea of Quine's naturalized epistemology, according to which we are bound to work from within our best theory of the world. Yeah, so again, you're starting from within a framework. For Davidson, too, we do not understand the idea of such a really foreign scheme. We know what states of minds are like. Do we? That's so fucking weird. I hate these sorts of terms. Do we actually understand what states of minds are like? Really? And how they are correctly identified. They are just those states whose contents can be discovered in well-known ways. That's really funny. Like, to me, this is like hilarious. The idea that we actually know how we understand our states of mind. But okay. If by using such methods we still fail to realize in what states others are, then it cannot be because our methods fail us, but because those states are not correctly called states of mind. They are not beliefs, desires, wishes, or intentions. So far, it seems that Davidson and Quine are in agreement in almost everything that Davidson has said in his argument against conceptual relativism. Or relativity. The question is, why does Davidson think that Quine believes in CR? We should see whether, for Quine, it is possible to have theories that are untranslated into each other. Doug says, can we pick up a bit? I know you have a lot to read. Why does it matter if untranslatable languages exist to the underlying argument? Well, shit. I'm not, like, what was the point of this paper again? We're over on page 6. So let me just, little thing here. If we go back to the get-go, like, what's the point here? So this is Davidson saying that Quine is wrong, and the author arguing for Davidson's position against Quine. Yeah, so his argument can legitimately target Quine, and then the author is going to defend Quine. So there's a Quine fan. So this is removing the skepticism from that Davidson brought against Quine in analytic philosophy. So you really have to like analytic philosophy for this, but what's saying is that Quine's philosophy is on a secure ground. That's really what's going on here. Hey, I'm happy to hear you saw some good news today, Koss. And be careful saying anyone died, because that would be bad if you said that. But I'm glad you saw some good news on the news. In what follows, I will concentrate on 2 issues. Yeah, exactly, Koss. In what follows, I will concentrate on 2 issues. First, the way Davidson understood Quine's early remarks on indeterminacy as a conclusion of his argument from above. Second, the way he understood Quine's mature later remarks on the indeterminacy of translation as a conjecture, in which underdetermination plays no significant role. I will argue that Davidson has failed to capture what Quine claims in his earlier as well as later works on the indeterminacy of theses. In both cases, Quine cannot be the target of Davidson's argument against conceptual relativism, and thus his accusation that Quine holds onto the third dogma of empiricism is false. And so here's your answer. We were just getting to it. This author is a competent, I'll go with a competent writer of analytic philosophy, because just as you were wondering what the point was, they reiterated it. They knew that what they were doing is kind of complicated and complex, even just like talking about analytic philosophy. And so they got back to like, let's stay focused on the point. It's that we're going to do a Quinean defense here. And that's what's going on. Davidson and the indeterminacy under determination distinction. Okay. What does make Quine's doctrine of the underdetermination of a scientific theory by data, and since linguistics is part of natural science, the inherited underdetermination of our theory of translation by data different from his thesis of the indeterminacy of translation. Quine's pre-75 works on the topic, especially with his argument from above, argue that translation is indeterminate because it withstands even the whole truth about nature. And the whole truth about nature is fixed within a chosen, naturally underdetermined total theory of the world. The early Quine offers the argument from above to explain how we get indeterminacy from underdetermination, according to which an underdetermination, which is an underdetermination additional to the natural underdetermination of a total theory of the world by evidence, reappears within our favored underdetermined theory of the world. Oh, great. So everything is undetermined. We have a theory of the world, and then within that, the translation of it is also underdetermined. Suppose we have achieved such a total theory listing all and every physical truth about the world. This theory is underdetermined even by the totality of all possible evidence, since it is possible to produce different theories which are all compatible with such a set of evidence data. Nonetheless, although there may always be such rival theories, having chosen one such theory, you expect no extra or additional underdetermination to emerge. The reason is that within this total theory, the totality of all truths about the world, or all the physical facts, is fixed, and that these facts must fix all other facts about any subject matter that you can claim to be real. If the theory fails to do so, the conclusion is that there is no fact about the alleged subject matter in no fact about the alleged subject matter in question. Call this Quine's physicalism, according to which nothing happens in the world without some redistribution of microphysical states. To give an example, within our total theory of the world, facts about temperature get fixed by the relevant physical facts, that is, facts about average kinetic energy of molecules at a certain time. Nothing about temperature remains underdetermined within this total theory. Yeah, so this is a strong theory of reductionism. Whatever the facts are, they get reduced to the ultimate microphysical facts, and that fixes all the other facts. And that's naturalism. That's a naturalistic claim. Quine's claim was that in the case of translation, underdetermined plus physicalism results in the indeterminacy of translation. For him, what the empirical underdetermination of global science shows is that there are various defensible ways of conceiving the world. It is then clear that the underdetermination thesis by itself results in nothing but merely epistemological consequences rather than a constitutive skeptical one, because its claim is only that there are always different ways of describing the world, not that there are no facts about the world and the things in it. Yeah, so you can imagine that given all the facts, we could describe those facts differently. And so it's the way we are understanding the facts. But like all the facts can still be covered. They're just described differently under different schemes. But like, say, half dozen of one, six of the other. You could do that over the entire, you could tile the world just entirely slightly differently so everything's shifted. But like, that's okay. Now you're not talking about the same things. Okay. On the other hand, you are bound to work from within one such theory all the time because, according to Quine's naturalism, you cannot start dealing with the world, predicting it, and explaining it independently of your choice among such undetermined theories of nature. As he puts it, we must speak from within a theory, albeit any one of various. Quine remains faithful to such a naturalistic view in his later works too. Thus, after choosing one such total theory, there should remain no question of uncertainty regarding facts about the subject matter under scrutiny. Apparently, it should be the same when the subject matter is translation or meaning. The latter, however, displays a different behavior for Quine. Even after making your choice theory, and hence after the totality of all physical facts about the world is fixed, you still have freedom of choice among alternative translation of the foreigner's theory. The reason, to put it briefly, is that even after matching all the observation sentences of the foreigner's theory with the observation sentences of your own theory, there still emerge alternative translations of that theory which are compatible with all such facts. That is, observation sentences being matched up in terms of having the same stimulus meaning, but which are mutually incompatible with each other. Within your chosen theory of the world, the same old empirical slack, the old indeterminacy between physical theories recurs in second intention. Such an additional underdetermination, together with Quine's physicalism, implies a constitutive skepticism about translation, or equivalently about the sameness of meaning, and thereby about meaning itself. As for Quine, there is no meaning without a criterion of identity, that is, translation. So, yeah, I'm losing everybody off this channel at this point. This is not surprising. But what we're talking about here is that the raw data of language, the words, whatever the meanings are, you're going to treat that as like the physical stuff. And then your translation is going to have a theory of what those, how to break up the words are and how to do stuff. And once you do that, you realize, okay, well, you can do it in multiple ways. And you can say, okay, we can make sense of what the person's saying in multiple ways, and they won't always match up. Yeah. I'm still here. I like Daniel Dennett. Yeah, it's fine. It's like, this is going to happen sometimes, but it's just like, I'm going to put everyone to sleep on like hard analytic philosophy like this. And this is one of the reasons I don't like it either. I mean, we're just arguing that Quine is not, well, Davidson criticized Quine for bad reasons. It's like, okay, sure. But like, whatever. But yeah. Rod's still here. Thank you. You're derping. Sure. Well, I appreciate you all, but it's just like, this is going to be just like a reading stream at this point, not a whole lot of discussion. The skeptical conclusion of the argument is that there is no fact about the correct translation of another theory into your own, and thus there is no such thing as uniquely and correctly translating one theory into another. As the early Quine puts it, where the indeterminacy of translation applies, there is no real question of right choice. There is no fact of the matter, even to within the acknowledged underdetermination of a theory of nature. Translation and thus meaning is indeterminate, not just underdetermined by behavioral evidence. What distinguishes between underdetermination and indeterminacy is the above claim about the existence of facts about correct translation. While in the case of indeterminacy, there is no fact about correct translation, in the case of underdetermination, there are facts about the world. Even the set of all possible evidence may fail to tell which theory is to be chosen. This means that we can count Quine as a non-factualist about meanings as they are traditionally conceived. Quine puts his attack on such a conception as follows. A sentence has a meaning people thought, and another sentence is translation if it has the same meaning. This, we see, will not do. Let me call such meanings fine-grained meanings. Yeah, I mean, because if you're treating language as sort of like the ground basis for stuff, and then you realize, well, how am I going to analyze it? You're not exactly sure, because you can't say there's a fact of the world because you're taking that language as the ground basis, and then you have to interpret it. So you're going to have indeterminacy there. It's going to be an interpretation. It's like, yeah. So again, it's where you're placing the fundamental ontology of the world. If you're placing the fundamental ontology in the world, and then we have theories of discussing it, it's under determination of our theories about what's fundamental in the world. If you're placing your fundamental ontology in language, then it's indeterminacy, because not only is it going to be underdetermined what you mean, but like that is what you're talking about. So it's indeterminate that there is anything there, because there is nothing that you're already assuming to be factual. Okay. Therefore, and it is very crucial, if contrary to Quine, you are a factualist about such fine-grained meanings, that is, a non-reductionist, the problem you face is at most epistemological, something very similar to the underdetermination problem. Yeah, so again, if you are treating it like this, so if you're contrary to Quine, so if you think there is some sort of fact of the matter, so if against Quine, then it becomes epistemological, because there are meanings in the world. But if you're not, you say the words are fundamental, that's where we're starting from, then you get into this indeterminacy thing. For a factualist about meaning, although there are facts about meaning, the available evidence, even all possible evidence, may fail to give you enough ground to say which methods among the alternatives is the uniquely correct method of identifying or capturing them. Nonetheless, if you accept the indeterminacy of translation, you have already given up on the existence of facts about fine-grained meanings, or the existence of any uniquely correct translation of a sentence into your own. You cannot be a factualist about the fine-grained meanings and concede that such meanings are not just underdetermined, but indeterminate too. You woke up 15 minutes ago, I'm here, but only in spirit. I appreciate it, Cos. You cannot claim that translation is indeterminate and, at the same time, accept that languages are, as a matter of fact, intertranslatable. Davidson endorses Quine's indeterminacy thesis and views it as a thesis additional to and separate from that of underdetermination. As he says, I accept Quine's thesis of the indeterminacy of translation. If so, we should expect that he rejects the claim that language can be, as a matter of fact, intertranslatable. But as we will see, this is the sort of claim that Davidson's argument against CR implies. We will also see that they are so because for Davidson there are facts about fine-grained meanings, that is, facts about what a speaker determinately means by her utterances. What I am concerned with in the rest of this paper is a deep tension in Davidson's reading of Quine, especially of Quine's indeterminacy thesis, which I think is the root of Davidson's implausible claim that Quine unjustifiably holds onto the third dogma of empiricism. Yeah. The tension. As previously indicated, Quine's early characterization of the underdetermination of theory by evidence contributes to Davidson's argument against conceptual relativism, though I was thinking about what I said before. Again, you're just going to have this difference between whether you think it's going to be whether you are on one side or the other side of the divide on this like linguistic issue of like, is translatability fundamental or not? Yeah. He claims to reject the third dogma of empiricism, that is, the content scheme dualism that, according to him, is still alive in Quine's work. This dualism survives even if, following Quine's claim in two dogmas of empiricism, we reject the analytic-synthetic dualism. The reason is that the question still remains as to what the relation between the empirical content of synthetic sentences and conceptual schemes is, and hence, in place of the dualism of analytic-synthetic, we get the dualism of conceptual scheme and empirical content. Davidson's argument attacked this latter dualism. For him, then, the content scheme dualism is pernicious, and any subscription to it is thereby unjustified. We cannot make sense of the idea that there is some uninterpreted content waiting to be organized or conceptualized by our potentially radically different conceptual schemes. He accuses Quine of holding on to such a view. The same or similar thoughts are expressed by Quine. I believe this accusation is unjustified because at very least it relies on a misconstrual of the early Quine's distinction between indeterminacy and underdetermination, which seems to be the focus of Davidson. Not only this, but it also rests on a misconstrual of the later Quine's view of indeterminacy of translation as a yet powerful conjecture. The sort of content scheme dualism that David objects to is dangerous for the view that Davidson himself, not Quine, is supportive of. Quine's alleged endorsement of a version of this dualism, if there is any, has its roots in the sort of Quinean view which Davidson misconstrues, though Quine has done his best to clarify why he is not committed to a dualism of the sort Davidson has in mind. Although both Quine and Davidson, at least at some level, accept the doctrine of underdetermination of theory by evidence, Davidson draws a conclusion from it and that Quine's indeterminacy thesis rejects. Unless Davidson offers an argument against non-factualism about fine-grained meanings, which he does not, the non-factualist Quine cannot be the target of his argument against conceptual relativity. Let me explain these tensions. First of all, the problem Davidson thinks he has with Quine surprisingly is not what Quine thinks it is. In Theories and Things 81, Quine includes a short chapter entitled On the Very Idea of a Third Dogma, in which he addresses such a charge from Davidson. It seems that in Davidson's mind, the purported third dogma is somehow bound up with a puzzling use on my part the phrase conceptual scheme. Quine emphasizes that his use of the notion of conceptual scheme is not really different from Davidson's. I think rather like Davidson in terms of language and the world. Where I've spoken of a conceptual scheme, I could have spoken of a language. Where I've spoken of a very alien conceptual scheme, I would have been content, Davidson will be glad to know, to speak of a language awkward or baffling to translate. Note that Quine emphasizes by a very alien conceptual scheme, he does not mean schemes untranslatable into each other in the sense David has in mind, rather schemes that are too awkward or baffling to be treated as translatable into our language. They are so for us. Swag Blessed, what's up? Wazah indeed. How you doing? Hope you're having a good day. Davidson nonetheless claims that the problem is more than that. For him, all such languages belong to one conceptual scheme, since either they are all intertranslatable, in which it is better we do not talk about there being only one or our own conceptual scheme, or they are not languages at all, in which case the claim that they belong to one conceptual scheme or another is unintelligible. I think, however, Davidson's objection to Quine itself is a dogma, considering Quine's previous amendments of his position. Davidson wants to dismiss any notion of a conceptual scheme altogether. In 1990, he responds to Quine's claim, quoted above, as follows. Quote, Quine mistakenly took my picture of his dualism of scheme and content to involve a separation of conceptual scheme and language. I had no such division in mind. What I argued was that something like the notion of uninterpreted content was necessary to make sense of conceptual relativism, and I thought I found more than a hint of such relativism in Quine. End quote. Quine in Davidson's 1990A work is still charged with holding onto the third dogma. Davidson's problem with Quine is that he thinks Quine views science as a man-made fabric, so that there inevitably remains an uninterpreted world that can possibly be interpreted in radically different ways. But Quine never really thought that his naturalistic view implies that there exists any uninterpreted given mediating our beliefs and the world. His emphasis has always been on the unintelligibility of assuming that there can be a vantage point outside the conceptual scheme, a claim that Davidson himself concedes. Quine makes it clear that, quote, to speak of that remote medium as radically different from ours is to say no more than the translations do not come smoothly. There is nothing for such a correlation to be uniquely right or wrong about. In saying this, I philosophize from the vantage point only of our own provincial conceptual scheme and scientific epoch. True, but I know no better. The difference between Quine and Davidson so far seems to be that for Quine we are bound to philosophize from our own point of view, while Davidson says that we better not say our own, as if there can be radically different ones. This can barely result in the claim that Quine thus maintains the third dogma, the content scheme dualism. In the passage quoted above, Quine clarifies what he means by the remoteness of a conceptual scheme. A language is remote if no smooth translation of it into ours is forthcoming, or, as he previously put, the translation would be simply too awkward and baffling to be counted as an acceptable translation. We will see, however, that Quine thinks of the notion of acceptable translation used in such different ways as a very vague notion. Interestingly, Quine also emphasizes that we cannot equate talk of the totality of experience with that of the world or the facts. Indeed, he himself has already dismissed empiricism as a theory of truth, a theory implying that true sentences are true in virtue of their corresponding to or fitting the facts or the world. Basically, this was one of Davidson's main points in his arguments against conceptual relativism. But Quine then rightly insists that, as a theory of evidence, however, empiricism remains with us, minus indeed the two old dogmas. Again, it is difficult to see how Davidson can still accuse Quine of embracing the third dogma after all the clarification Quine makes, since, first of all, Davidson too agrees that there is nothing for true senses to correspond to. Secondly, and more importantly, Davidson does not deny that evidence and experience can still play an important role in the construction of a theory of interpretation. As he says, although sensation plays a crucial role in the causal process that connects beliefs with the world, it is a mistake to think that it plays an epistemological role in determining the contents of those beliefs. What does? Oh, interpretation. Okay. Quine, as we saw, never made such a mistake. Neither Quine nor Davidson believe that experience, sensory evidence, and the like can play an epistemologically salient role in our explanation of the connection between the world and beliefs. Having taken all these into account, as well as Quine's willingness to equate a very alien conceptual scheme simply with a scheme awkward or baffling to translate or not smoothly translatable, the implausibility of Davidson's insistence on viewing Quine as an advocate for the third dogma becomes clearer and at the same time more puzzling. It involves a search for a deeper philosophical problem which David seems to have with Quine's view in general. Energy says, while it's important, analytic epistemology, especially of language, gets into very nitty-gritty arguments. Yeah, so this is the issue here. And as I was talking about earlier, this I feel like is a Kantian hangover, where we're talking about these conceptual schemes that precondition our ability to talk about the world. And so this is sort of a 20th century rehash of the Kantian metaphysics. So you're going to get these sorts of like, well, you know, this person has made too many assumptions. This, like, you can't do that. That's like too many, you're like, there's too much background. Something. One's like, no, I didn't do that. You agree to this too. So yeah, you're getting into this, the details here. So, I mean, this is a defense. It's like, why is Davidson making this claim saying Quine said this dumb shit? And he's saying, well, no, Quine didn't say dumb shit, but what is Davidson's problem then? And that's where we're up to. Like, what is the problem then here? Quine agrees that we are already accustomed, after all, to cutting corners and tolerating rough approximations, even in neighborly translation. These local failures happen all the time in our familiar language, but he, at the same time, invites us to note that there is also the indeterminacy of translation to contend with. Davidson's problem is with Quine's somewhat older claim that patterns of behavior and different correlations between words in the world can apparently be radical, so that we may face a new and as yet unimagined pattern of beyond individuation. As previously indicated, Davidson argues that there cannot be such imagined patterns, and in some sense languages and schemes, because our criterion for some things being a language or an intelligible pattern of linguistic behavior is translatability. We cannot make sense of the idea that there can be unimagined and thus untranslatable patterns of relations between subjects and the world, but Quine seemed to be willing to count this new and yet unimagined pattern as linguistic responses that are too awkward or to translate, or as tolerating rough approximations that may happen in neighborly translation, even as the Davidsonian local failures, which were for him philosophically unimportant. Moreover, Quine's point from a different point of view can be construed as the claim that without working from within a theory, everything would be an unimagined pattern beyond individuation. This brings us back to Davidson's problematic reading of Quine's indeterminacy and underdetermined theses. Let me say a bit more about this. Yeah, so it looks like early Quine was a little maybe loose in specifying where there could be, like, you know, a problem here, a problem there, but not a global problem. And Davidson took this to be a global problem, even though they both agree that, you know, every so often a sentence or a word is going to be difficult. But that's not the point. It's language untranslatability, not a sentence, word, or particular concept that's hard or awkward to translate between languages. So it looks like that's what this author is claiming, that was Davidson's mistake. Mistaking the local translation errors for a global translation problem. Okay. The early Quine and Davidson both agreed that theories are underdetermined by all available or even all possible evidence, and Davidson used it in his argument against conceptual relativity. Yeah, that's what I'm saying CR is. I'm forgetting already. Quine, however, has modified his view on this matter, especially with regard to the claim that, according to the underdetermination doctrine, we can have empirically equivalent but logically incompatible theories. Such logical incompatibility may invoke the idea of radically different theories. Later, however, he became entirely suspicious as to whether underdetermination can be characterized in intelligible way at all. This, as we will see, affects the sort of support he thought he could give for the indeterminacy thesis. Nevertheless, I will agree with Hilton that it turns out for Quine that the underdetermination thesis is not of great significance to him. It turns out, in other words, that it is more difficult than he thought to provide a defensible characterization of the underdetermination thesis. As Quine himself confesses, quote, in treating of the underdetermination of theories, it is a poor idea to assume compatibility with all possible data, though in an early paper I put it that way, for it is both unrealistic and irrelevant. What matters is that the theory be empirically equivalent, that is, that they imply all the same possible data, end quote. Yeah, I mean, that's what you're really trying to do. The fact that you're trying to globally translate between stuff, you're not going to be able to get everything, sure, but you have to be empirically adequate. You have to talk about what you want to talk about in a meaningful way, and that's fair. In Quine's early treatment of the underdetermination thesis, we could, in principle, have different theories that are empirically equivalent but logically incompatible, because we could think of the same sentence appearing in both but true in one of them and false in the other. Quine then came to the belief that we can resolve such incompatibility simply by changing some terms in one appearance of that sentence. To borrow an example from Hilton, two theories may have the following incompatible sentences. Molecules have greater mass than electrons, and molecules do not have greater mass than electrons. We can alter the second one by replacing the word molecule at every occurrence with the word schmolecule, The apparent logical incompatibility now disappears. Quine's doubts about underdetermination and its role in the argument from above indeterminacy began in 1975 in his paper on empirically equivalent systems of the world, where he claims that, quote, the thesis of underdetermination, even in my latest tempered version, asserts that our system of the world is bound to have empirically equivalent alternatives that are not reconcilable by reconstrual of predicates, however devious. This, for me, is an open question, end quote. We saw that if the theories cannot be treated as logically incompatible, yet there must be a sense in which they can be viewed as genuinely rivals. Quine is now unsure if we can give a feasible criterion for such rivalry. In 1990, in 3 Indeterminacy, Quine makes another confession. Quote, I no longer consider the question of identity of theories worth pausing over. We can just speak of drastically unlike theory formulations, irreducible one to the other by any known system of sentence-to-sentence reinterpretation, and let the notion of theory go. I shall keep the word, but it may be construed as short for theory formulation, end quote. Instead of different rival theories, we may instead talk about different theory formulations, not reducible to each other sentence by sentence. They are, however, formulations of a single theory. What about genuine differences in theories? Quine investigates different answers to this problem. The most attractive one for him is to separate theory formulations from languages. Quote, meaningful applications of the truth predicate on the other hand, extend to the whole language is not limited to any particular theory formulation. Empirically equivalent and logically compatible theories can be accepted as true descriptions of the world, even if one of them uses terms irreducibly alien to the other. End quote. In this sense, all such theories are true within our own language, which is compatible with what Davidson claims in his arguments against CR. Now, for Quine, a total coherent system of the world remains the scientific and philosophical ideal, but again, multiple ways of achieving it can all be accounted true. In a sense, however, the theories seem to result in different ontologies because of the different sort of entities their variables may range over. Nonetheless, Quine believed that the idea of separating theory formulations from our language has the consequence that these divergences can be accommodated within the inclusive language. Thus, there remain no appearance of radically different languages untranslatable to our own. We are all working from within our own language, which is the only language that we know. At this stage, Quine views each of these topics as separate, that is, the indeterminacy of translation, which deals with stimulations and their effects on the determination of meanings, the inscrutability of reference, which results in different ways of slicing the world, but which keeps truth conditions untouched, and the underdetermination of scientific theories, which deals with empirical content. So far, therefore, Davidson seems to have no reason to accuse Quine of embracing the third dogma, even in this period of Quine's philosophical writings. Within our own language, truth is immanent, as we will see, and because of his naturalism, we cannot make sense of the claim that we can go outside of our language and see how other languages can be or fail to be translatable into our own. Within our own language, however, translation remains indeterminate. Yeah, so again, more of the same shit. Quine was just trying to be like, look, there are all these different problems. Once you assume one thing, then you can reapply the same sort of scheme to another. If you hold the language fixed, then it becomes indeterminate because you can't match up what you're saying to like there's no like fact about the language because you're holding it as bedrock. It's not true or false at that point. It's just the basis. Then if you hold the world fixed, then you have underdetermination. You can talk about the world in different ways, but then you have different ways of truth. And so you've got all these different ways of slicing it up, but you don't have the way that Davidson needs it because it's okay. All the different ways Quine accounted for. All right. In his post-1990 works, Quine talks about the indeterminacy without even mentioning underdetermination. In 1975, he declared that in its full generality, the thesis of underdetermination is surely untenable. For him, the doctrine of is plausible insofar as it is intelligible, but is less readily intelligible than it may seem. As previously indicated, these claims have consequences for his argument from above. If underdetermination cannot be really made intelligible, or best is only a conjecture, the indeterminacy that was based on that doctrine in the argument from above automatically turns into a conjecture too. It seems that Quine treats underdetermination as a conjecture, at least between 75 and 90. For instance, he says, I conjectured that physical theory, the global system of the world, is underdetermined, but not that every subordinate system was underdetermined. As a result, he says that argument from above, that I have lost my liking for this particular argument from the indeterminacy of translation. Later on in 86, the indeterminacy thesis is officially called a conjecture by him. Still, this is how he treats the matter with translation. Translation is not the recapturing of some determined entity, a meaning. As we will see, he never gives up on the idea that meaning and translation are indeterminate. So now we're doing history. In 1990, though he already started pulling back the crucial underdetermination premise, he emphasizes the essential difference between the two theses. In both cases, the total of possible evidence is insufficient to clinch the system uniquely, but the indeterminacy of translation is additional to the other. So that if we settle upon one of the empirically equivalent systems of the world, however arbitrarily, we still have within it indeterminacy of translation. But this no longer means that an argument to the effect that meaning is indeterminate is forthcoming. In his 95 books, From Stimulus to Science, there is no word about underdetermination, though indeterminacy is still pretty much alive. Quine never wavers about fine-grained meanings. He, rather, is not quite sure anymore that he could refute their existence, beyond pointing out the weirdness and lack of progress in the assumption that they do exist. Dogma says nitty-gritty sometimes and nitty-picky other times. Yeah, it's mostly nitpicky in analytic philosophy. But I mean, this is how people argue stuff out. They say, look, this is the old epicycles problem in science. You can always make more theory and make more theory to fix whatever problems you need. Like, you can always do that. Like, these people are smart, they're creative, they're motivated. You can always do that. But eventually, you get weighed down by all this theory, and other theories just become more attractive because they do a lot more with less. And that's mostly, like, there's a cognitive load associated with these theories. You can have a ton of stuff figured out, but if you're going through a million steps to, like, argue at every point, no one wants to listen to you after a while. And so it's nitty gritty and nitty picky, but eventually people will be like, just stop, don't do this. What's up, Latvian Jesus? Assume the cow is a perfect sphere and there is no air resistance. Yeah, if you want to do physics, you have to make, what are they called? Abstractions, generalizations. You have to make idealizations. It's the same with everything. You can't talk about everything all at once. It's the old theory of map of the world. If you had a perfect map, it would just be the world. There wouldn't be a map. A map has to idealize away from the world in some way, abstract away from it. And so what happens here, what's up, Bowser? What's happening here is we're arguing over some nitpicky little things, but you're showing that if you're going to go with Davidson, you're taking on all this extra baggage. It's just like, well, stick with the Quine. They already seem to agree mostly. And so that's kind of what's happening here. That's the structure of this argument. It's that, look, they're not so far away. And if you stick with the Davidson, you end up with all this baggage, and that's bad. So this is just a battle between 20th century giants, and this person's on Quine's side. Now, maybe you can go find a Davidsonian, and they'll defend the position here. But, the author here just did a bunch of history showing Quine's evolution and his ideas. And, so not only did this author provide historical arguments besides the textual analysis. So I mean, this is well done analytic philosophy, but as with all analytic philosophy, the question wasn't if you should. The question wasn't if you could. You should have stopped to think if you should. Is this worth anyone's time? Maybe for people who care about this, but I'm just trying to do the Ian Malcolm, and I'm losing my mind already. Well, not already. I've been streaming for 2.5 hours, and I still have got 6 pages to read. The indeterminacy of translation in Quine's latest works on the topic is treated as follows. Yeah, see, again, you're so worried about whether or not you could, you didn't stop to think of whether you should. It's like this is giving you both arguments and history in defense of Quine. In 95, Quine distinguishes between two senses in which sentences can be treated as untranslatable without mentioning the underdetermination doctrine at all. 1. Some sentences like neutrinos lack mass are not translatable into English of 1930. He also concedes that there can be multiple translatability in that whenever there is an English translation at all holophrastically acceptable by whatever standard as yet undefined, there will normally be many. I have no idea what holophrastically means. I don't care. In this sense, if we can make sense of the idea that there really is an English translation, there can be many others, all the other English sentences that agree holophrastically in meaning with that one, again by whatever standards as yet undefined. What's up, Lumpy? Good evening. Baraday, what's up? I apologize, Baraday. I was requested to read some analytic philosophy, and this is like high analytic philosophy. It is not fun in some sense, but it is very technical and it's kind of interesting if you care about these people and their arguments. Lumpy, I hope you're doing well. I know you've had you just seem to be having an up and down summer. Yeah, I'm just lunch break anyway. Yeah, nice. Yeah, so I'm just trying to get through this. It's a little longer than what I normally read, so I'm going fast. Ear is better. That's good to hear. When I was a kid, I had constant earaches. It drove me nuts. One of the best parts about getting older is no more earaches. We're having a blast here. Hey, I'm happy if you're happy. I mean, I'm thinking about these arguments and the concepts, and it's yeah, this is good to know because underdetermination is a really cool thesis, actually. And so is indeterminacy stuff. But now we're getting to the nitty gritty about how it reacts when it deals with natural languages. It's okay, chill the fuck out. It's why do we like underdetermination so much? Why do we not like it? What do we like about natural language? What do we not like about it? So yeah. Laffine says, holophrastic is a word I don't think I've ever want to learn the meaning of. Yeah. This is... Yeah, it's we're learning new words here that we don't need. Okay, this is very similar to Davidson's claim about underdetermination and the local failures of translatability, which for him carried no philosophical importance. Nonetheless, regarding the sort of standard we may think of for translating a sentence into English, he emphasizes that translation is still indeterminate. The deep problem here is, quote, is just the lack of a standard of sameness of meaning itself within our language or between languages, end quote. We lack any plausible standard by which we can identify meaning or correct translation. I cannot go through a full discussion of Quine's remarks on the problems with finding such a standard here. But to put it briefly, Quine famously believed that there is no entity without identity, meaning no meaning without sameness of meaning. Although for occasion sentences and observation sentences, we may be able to find some shaky criterion for sameness of meaning, that is, a speaker having the disposition to give the same verdict, assent, dissent, abstention, to both sentences on any and every occasion, he believed that, quote, regarding standing sentence, I see no prospect of a clean-cut concept of sameness of meaning, end quote. Actually, no. Not end quote. Yeah, end quote. He described the situation with regarding the notion of sameness of meaning as the ghost in the machine, following Ryle's famous metaphor. I may get back to this. I think I'm going to make a Rylean theory of reference. That will be something for November, December, or maybe January at this point. The problem gets worse when we consider the case of two speakers translating the speech of one another. Two speakers might disagree on the truth of an occasion sentence because of a difference in belief rather than meaning, granted the reality of that distinction. Considering these and other problems and complexity, Quine concludes that we can hope for no criterion of sameness here. You brain no more? Yeah, I know. This is very analytic-y. Welcome to Analytic Philosophy. I mean, this is in Acta Analytica, the journal. I wish you a dreamless, pleasant no-brainness. Thank you for stopping by. If you have to rest, I entirely understand. In this case, we have the indeterminacy quote. Would they, two field linguists spent long years going bilingual, agree in the end on sameness of meaning between native standing sentences and English ones? Or suppose they both compiled manuals of translation and both manuals proved successful in translating some long native monologue into coherent English. Then suppose we translate it again using the two manuals alternately, sentence by sentence. Would the result still be coherent? If not, and given no basis for saying which manual is at fault, we have what I have called indeterminacy of translation. Yeah. I mean, and this is like, you can play this with Google Translate now. I just saw there was a viral post on this doing French, where you translate the English into French and the French back in English, and the meaning starts changing over time. This is called telephone from back in the day when you were a kid. And so it's like, yeah, you start to realize that's like, this concept shows that translation does have problems with it inherently built in. There is a sense in which we can choose between the rival translations since we have some practical reason to do so. The practical purpose of such a chosen manual would be inculcation in us of fluency and effectiveness in the native language. Beyond such pragmatic criteria, however, there is nothing factual about meaning. Quine's doubt thus remains, quote, the word meaning is indeed bandied as freely in lexicography as in the street, and so be it, but let us be wary when it threatens to figure as a supporting member of a theory. In lexicography, it does not. End quote. This captures Quine's latest remarks on the indeterminacy of translation as a profound doubt about the existence of fine-grained meaning due to the lack of any feasible criterion for translation or sameness of meaning. Davidson's problematic treatment of Quine's view can now be seen clearer. 4.2. Davidson's misconstrual of Quine's indeterminacy thesis. After all these clarifications and modifications from Quine about the indeterminacy and underdetermination theses, however, the later Davidson still gets it wrong. In 1999, he characterizes Quine's indeterminacy of translation and its relation to the underdetermination of translation as follows, quote, there are endless things that may happen next, many of which would confirm theories at odds with our present theories. This is underdetermination. Indeterminacy is not like this. No amount of evidence, finite or infinite, would decide whether to measure areas in acres or hectares. End quote. You're right. The author's right. This is a really weird quote. This does not seem to be accurate, like, to underdetermination. Like, that's just a weird fucking quote here. This characterization of the Quinean indeterminacy underdetermination distinction is deeply puzzling and problematic. The distinction is, I mean, I'm almost going to say that, like, did this author get Davidson right? Because this is weird. I mean, maybe Davidson really was this fucked up in, like, the analysis of indeterminacy and underdetermination, but, like, it just seems weird on this reading. And granted, we went through this whole paper defending Quine, and that's what the author is doing here, but, like, it just seems weird that this quote is the way it is. I feel like it's almost out of context, but you take the author at their word here, and, like, the editor and the reviewers. Yes, deeply puzzling and problematic. Like, this really don't make sense. The distinction that Davidson draws above by no means leads to any philosophically interesting distinction between indeterminacy and underdetermination, neither in the early Quine's way of treating the distinction nor in the later Quine's remarks on the indeterminacy. The distinction that Davidson drew and took to be the indeterminacy-underdetermination distinction can at most and at best be considered a distinction between weak and strong underdetermination. Yeah, like, that's actually, I agree with the author there, because this does not talk about indeterminacy. Quine's early view of the indeterminacy thesis had it that the indeterminacy can be established even by working with the weaker version of underdetermination thesis. The result of the early Quine's argument from above was that two conflicting manuals of translation can both do justice to all dispositions to behavior, and that, in such a case, there is no fact of the matter of which manual is right. The difference between indeterminacy and underdetermination is ontological, as Quine emphasizes, not epistemological. Lumpy says, lol, I feel like socializing a little but have nothing to share or talk about. Rummages in own fanny? Yeah. LinkedIn is a plague, is what's on my mind. The only success can be reported. Meta is eroding my soul each time I must go on it. LinkedIn is emotional poison. Yeah, that sounds really, really icky. It just does. You know? I mostly avoid social networks, and LinkedIn is definitely a social network. because of this sort of thing. Everyone's showing off and trying to make themselves the best. I mean, here in the United States, I mean, the job market's bad. I'm not looking to change jobs at the moment. I mean, I might poke around at schools in a few months, but like job stuff, like I work with young guys. One of them just got out of college. He can't get a call back. It's like really bad. He got a call back, but it was out in the middle of Pennsylvania. Yeah, so Stanford requires that students use LinkedIn. Gross, yeah. Well, I mean, Microsoft probably paid them off. So it's like, if you're subjecting yourself to the social media game that it is at the moment, it's like, it's really just ugly. It just is. So we'll see. Anyway, there's like 4 or 5 more pages on this. For the early Quine, as indicated above, underdetermination by itself cannot give rise to the skeptical conclusion that there is no fact about meaning. Rather, it is underdetermination together with physicalism that can do so. Corporate circle jerk of the worst kind, yeah. And you know, like reading this paper, it's like, this was the shit you have to read in school. This is what you're expected to understand, the different positions in these arguments. It's like, I don't care. Like, I have other things to worry about nowadays. And it's like, that's the same thing with like these sorts of corporate games that you have to play. It's like, my brother is getting like screwed over at work. It's really kind of like painful to hear him like talk about like his shitty ass boss now, because they used to get along, then something happened and he got blamed, and it looks like his boss is using him as a scapegoat to cover his own ass. And it's like, this is terrible shit. And it's just really, really dumb stuff. And it's like, all right, do I want to read this sort of thing? Well, I read it for content on stream. That's cool. But do I want to like go and dig into these arguments? No, I don't. It's like, yeah. Lumpy says, I'm in a work position that strictly forbids you from posting anything on social media, especially on LinkedIn, so I look super underachieving. I'm actually doing great at your work. Yeah, I mean, that's like the thing. If you're like, you've got to play the game. It's like, yeah. It's like, yeah, it's not great. Lumpy's like, yeah, like, Dojo's like, that's lucky. It's like, but still, like, I mean, if you're doing great, but you can't show it off, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's not fun, but it's like, you're getting paid, I hope, to, you know, part of your job. What's this? Share this thing? What do we got here? Latvian. I'm excited to announce that I will be drinking 10 beers tonight. I'm eager to experience all that this opportunity will bring, and I look forward to sharing my findings with my fellow peers. Special thanks to Asahi Beverages, Sapporo USA, and Tsingtao Brewery Limited for all your help in this process. I'm truly grateful for all the experience that have led me to this point. I can't wait to dive into what future has to offer. Yeah. Exactly. So, but it's like, yeah, this is the tough stuff. Like, this is there's always a grind, no matter what, whatever business you're in. Lumpy says, all of what LinkedIn is now, I'm looking for a job. I got a new job. I got funding. Yeah. So it's, all this actionable stuff. It sounds like you're always trying to be moving. Yeah. Dojo says, I got a bit of trouble on LinkedIn for posting everything that Microsoft did that was shitty and calling the CEO assholes. Yeah. 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 You're 54 and you don't give a shit? Exactly. If you can not give a shit. But again, the game is to make everything look rosy, peachy, like you're on your grind. That's how it goes. And so it's like you have to know everything. You have to do everything. Everything is strictly off limit per the meta. Yeah. So it's just how it goes. Work is virtuous, don't you know? Yeah. So if you're not playing into like that narrative, as Latvian is indicating, it's not good. Like, because if you are not playing into like the work life sort of thing, then you're going to show that everyone else also is like playing into this, and that's not necessarily what they want to talk about, because it's not helpful for them on the thing that shows the work life grind as positive. So it's like, yeah. So there's always these questions like, what is going on? Like, who's paying to keep these systems as they are? It's definitely helping somebody, and who's it helping? Like, who does LinkedIn help in the end? I don't know. Like, who does the social media really benefit? It's like, yeah, do we get lots of like dank memes? Sure. But like, who's really benefiting? Who's making the money off these things? It's not us. It's like, we could get jobs very easily Well, no, not very easily. We got jobs back in the day, too. Lumpy says, but that's just it. You can't say something, I solved a thorny problem in the lab tape because, one, there was no problem ever and you're ground floor worker. Ew, yeah, exactly. Latvian says, small business owners are looking for their next victim. Yep, that too. Dojo says, there's some sort of very scary cult of Microsoft that freaks Dojo out. Watching everybody about .NET shit, they're way too happy. Yeah. Well, I mean, Microsoft is like one of the biggest corporations in the country and the world. They have a lot of multi-millionaires because of Microsoft and like a whole lot of industry built around it. They don't want to hear like that there's problems. Just that's what happens. Anywho's, let's get through this because I'm going to start losing I'm already starting to lose my mind. I can feel it. But I only got a few more pages. I can go quick. Let's see. I'm on 177 now. I got to yeah, 181. I got to get to 21 pages here. Okay, we'll get there. The later Quine, as we saw, never gave up on the claim that meaning is indeterminate, though now his focus is on the remoteness of finding any plausible criterion for the sameness of meaning, and thus, as a conjecture, he doubts we can really talk about meaning facts. Yeah, laughing, so when your revenue is approximately fuck you billions, it's easy to be happy. Yep. Frickin' Globus is on with his whole frickin' crew. Hey, good for frickin' Globus. I love frickin' Globus. Yeah. I hope he doesn't raid in here. I'm going to leave as soon as I get done with this paper. I can't handle any of this anymore. Ugh. Yeah, I'd like to have fuck you billions. That would be nice. As Helton puts it, Quine, after all, comes to think of indeterminacy as a conjecture. Agnosticism about indeterminacy, however, may be enough for Quine's philosophical purpose, enough that is to show that synonymy and the related idea of a proposition cannot be taken for granted, as ideas available for philosophical use. This much from the later Quine suffices to show that Quine's non-factualism about meaning allows, in a sense, for the possibility of the existence of untranslatable languages, though again we are bound to work from within our own language all the time. The factualist Davidson, who seems to miss the fundamental ontological difference between indeterminacy and underdetermination, refuses to accept such a claim. Lumpy says, but in truth, all is well for me at the moment. I tasted a great tonkatsu instant ramen. Nice, yes. That's good. I have a local ramen place now, and it's like, I'm not going to say it's like top dog, but it's good enough. Like, my local ramen place is like good enough. And it's like, I'm very happy that I can go get myself like actual ramen for like non-crazy price. Like, I think I had a bowl for $15 a few days ago. Like, that's like their lowest price ramen. But, you know, that's, you know, you get some slices of pork. You get, it's all the whole deal. So you get one bowl of ramen for $15. Really not bad. I mean, granted, I'd like it to be half the price, but I'd like everything to be half the price now. But, like, yeah, it was good. So, yeah, I was very pleased with the ramen. When did I get that? Was that, like, Sunday or something? I forget. Your favorite sushi place is a sister ramen restaurant? You should go. Yeah. Like, they don't always do it. It's a specialty. Like, ramen is its own thing. Sushi, you got your sushi chef, you got your ramen chef. Not the same. But, like, yeah, it's good. So, there, when I go to Colombia, speaking, because why did I bring up Colombia earlier? Oh, yeah, I was talking about tongue, sorry. But, like, there's a ramen place underneath the one train station at 125th. And so that's just a few blocks north of Columbia, and I quite often go there. I think it's called Jin Ramen for anyone in the New York City area. I quite like their stuff. Lumpy says, and this weekend, Muffins bring me to her favorite lesbian cuisine restaurant. Oh, Lebanese. Tears up. You need a moment. Yeah, that would have been fun, though. But what are you going to do? Actually, I really like Lebanese food. Lebanese food's great. You should be very happy. Like, that's like, there was this Lebanese place by me in Boston many years ago, and it was phenomenal. Had the best rice pudding I've ever had in my life. So, wonderful, like really great chicken, or was it, no, like they had a, what's it called? Shawarma. Their shawarma was like, that was top tier. You okay, you go to sleep? Good night, Lumpy. Thanks for stopping by. Having granted Quine strong adherence to the indeterminacy thesis in both his early and later works, his view is that choosing a correct translation and unique fine-grained meaning on the basis of an objective criterion is impossible, since as a matter of fact, there are no such things to be chosen. In this sense, languages, theories, or conceptual schemes cannot be said to be translatable into one another within Quine's philosophical framework. Davidson never attacks such a philosophical position that is non-factualism about fine-grained meanings. Rather, he objects to what this view may imply without recognizing the possibility of translatability and untranslatability between languages lies somewhere else in Quine's philosophy. We should note, however, that the notion of translation itself is treated as a very shaky notion by Quine. Let me explain this point. In a sense, as briefly mentioned before, we can say that for both the early and later Quine, in practice and by employing pragmatic criteria, translation is perfectly possible. Quote, in practice, we end the regress of background languages in discussions of reference by acquiescing in our mother tongue and taking its words at face value. End quote. But as Quine nicely puts it, quote, you all may plausibly have arrived at much the same usage as mine, but the sameness that I have in mind here is merely the sameness that is tested by smoothness of dialogue and not a sameness of hidden meanings. End quote. The later Quine was in complete agreement with this claim as well. For him, as we saw, we usually use the notion of translation and meaning recklessly. Part of the problem lies in the very notion of translation, especially when it is claimed that in practice translation is possible. Quote, if there is a question in my mind whether a language might be so remote as to be largely untranslatable, and hence beyond the reach of even definition of remoteness, that question arises from the vagueness of the very notion of translation. End quote. Here, Quine appeals to his definition of the remoteness of a conceptual scheme, or the, quote, conceptual distance between languages, which is based on practical considerations regarding the length of sentences under translation. We should try to choose those translations that are the shortest equivalents in respect of length for every pair of sentences that can be called acceptable translations of each other. All right, I just want to make a small claim here is that I'm starting to be more in agreement with later Quine, where Quine's starting to realize that these conceptual schemes are really problematic to talk about. When he's talking about the remoteness of definition of defining a remoteness of a conceptual scheme, it doesn't really make sense. And this is what I was saying. I don't like this idea. I feel like a Kantian hangover in the 20th century. And you start to realize that when you talk about these preconditions, they start to trip you up. And this is why one of the reasons I don't like this sort of like Kantian setup where you've got like these conceptual schemes that are preconditions on how you see the world. I don't like it. You start to get tripped up. And this is what I kind of agree with, like this sort of like Quine getting very uncomfortable about this whole discussion here because of this background conceptual scheme that they both started with. It's like, yeah, this was a bad idea. Okay. Quine thinks that this definition of acceptable translation is vague too, though not vaguer than the notion of acceptable translation itself, and certainly does not give an effective procedure to choose between the rival translation. Yeah, the whole idea of acceptable translation presupposes that there are different conceptual schemes that you're starting, and that's why you need acceptable translations. But you see, you get uncomfortable talking about acceptable translation because it completely depends on the idea of having a background scheme that you're all like seeing the world through. The whole thing is really getting uncomfortable at this point. You realize you don't know any of the things. Okay, after all, these are pragmatic criteria and practical considerations. Ironically, Quine does not think that Davidson really targeted his use of the notion of translation, as he says, translatability is a flimsy notion, unfit to bear the weight of the theories of cultural incommensurability that Davidson effectively and justly criticizes. What do you mean by a Kantian hangover? So the style of argumentation here, Dojo, is that Kant said, okay, look, we need preconditions. This is how we do metaphysics. We have preconditions on the way we see the world. We have like grand abstract categories like, time or space or whatever that we use to like understand the world, because we couldn't understand the world if we didn't preconceive of some concepts like time or space that we can move around in. Okay? Well, stop saying preconceive of concepts and say preconceive of what was the terms here? Jeez, I'm losing words. Conceptual scheme. So we don't have concepts anymore. We have schema in language. That is how we preconceive the world. That's what we're using. Sounds much more naturalistic to say, well, there aren't categories anymore. There are conceptual schema that exists within language, and that's how we describe the world. But it comes to the same thing. When you try to describe the conceptual schema, you run into the same problems. They get more and more remote, and they're more and more abstract, and they're basically, for me, like just a updated naturalistic version of a Kantian category. And that's why I call it a Kantian hangover. It plays the same role in these theories as pre-configuring the world that you might like then interpret the world inside that scheme. So that's why I call it Kantian hangover, because it plays the same role. And it's just it's updated for the 20th century, but it's still just as bad in my opinion. And he's like, should have been, it was cool when Kant did it a few hundred years ago. Not so cool now. But like language isn't pre-empirical. What do you mean pre-empirical? Yeah, you can say language is or isn't. I just don't think it's good philosophy to use this as like your starting point for your argumentation. Like whatever language is fine. I don't care. But if you're going to use this as philosophy stuffs, I don't like this kind of argumentation. Like, I don't think you're going to make a whole lot of hay with that. So, yeah. So, nonetheless, Davidson's target was Quine, not cultural relativism. Yeah, so David had a problem, accused Quine of it, but Quine's just like, yeah, I wasn't making that claim, man. It thus seems that Davidson has also missed the distinctions Quine draws between different notions of translation, such as translatability in terms of objective criteria, translatability in terms of pragmatic criteria, and translatability of theory formulations versus languages. According to Davidson's argument against conceptual relativity, anything that can be called language has already been viewed as translatable into our own language. Since Davidson aims to criticize Quine, his claim is that there can be no radically different conceptual schemes in the sense of languages that are not, as a matter of fact, translatable into our own language. Quine thinks otherwise because he's a non-factualist about meaning. He truly believes in the indeterminacy of translation and the helplessness of any search for translatability in terms of any objective criterion. It is also worth noting that for Quine, as a consequence of his naturalism, truth is immanent. It is a confusion to suppose that we can stand aloof and recognize all the alternative ontologies as true in their several ways, all the envisaged words as real. Truth is immanent and there is no higher. We must speak from within a theory, albeit any of various. End quote. Because we have no other way but to work from within our theory of the world, all truths about the world are thereby fixed within this theory. This, for Quine, does not imply relativism about truth, although each of the rival theories can be taken to be evidently true only from its own point of view. They can be admitted thenceforward as true descriptions of one and the same world in different terms. The threat of relativism of truth is averted. Latvian says, having a base of language schema doesn't go far because language is too nebulous to be a thing to build off of. Yeah, that's fair. I agree. We also discussed Quine's move from theory formulations to languages. He thinks so, while Davidson claims that given the dogma of dualism of a scheme and reality, we get conceptual relativity and truth relative to a scheme. End quote. Quine never admits to such a conclusion and never believed in relativism about truth. Let me end my discussion by coming back to the root of Davidson's claims that Quine believes in the third dogma of empiricism. The departure. For both the early and later Quine, the indeterminacy of translation implies that there can be no fact of the matter about fine-grained meanings about a unique correct translation of a theory. There is no hope to find any criterion of sameness of meaning, and there is no meaning without such a criterion. Davidson, however, denies that there is any skeptical problem with regard to facts about fine-grained meanings. The only problem for him is the epistemological problem of determining which way of capturing such facts is correct. Davidson sometimes talks about meanings of facts as if they are the Quinean facts about stimulus meaning, but it is clear that they are not. He has never been clear about what such meaning facts are. Perhaps the clearest remarks from him on this matter appear in the following passage. Propositional attitudes are, quote, as real as atoms and baseball bats, and the facts about them are as real as facts about anything else, end quote. However, This, however, adds nothing illuminating about what such meaning facts are. What is clear is that he does not believe that accepting indeterminacy implies that there are no facts of the matter about meaning or the propositional attitudes, end quote, because as he continues, the mental is no more mysterious than molecular biology or cosmology. There are facts about molecules, their interactions with one another, and there are average kinetic energy at a certain time. See, this is the funny thing is it's not very easy to actually determine any of these things. Like reductionism is very hard to do. So the idea you're reducing heat to like average motion is very difficult. Conceptually, a lot of stuff is difficult here. But like they were all like in this area, all gets roughshod over. For this reason, such physical facts can be said to be uniquely determining facts about the temperature of an object. Yeah, they can be, but do we have a full reduction? No. Quine agreed that there are such facts and that they are capable of so determining the temperature, but contrary to Davidson, he denied that there are any similar facts about fine-grained meanings. Yeah, exactly, Levin. They're all continuing to arbitrary axioms. There's lots of stuff, and like especially again, if you're taking language as your base, your bedrock, then you're using language to analyze language, and that's part of the core problem here. That the indeterminacy that Quine is on. You're going to get yourself self-referential meanings, and then you're going to be indeterminate, not necessarily underdetermined, but just indeterminate also, because you can have whatever you think it means, but like it's about the world, and then it's like, well, okay, if you can have, it's not epistemological in that you're not worried about what other people mean, but it's indeterminate because there is no fact of the matter because you're using words to refer to themselves. Yeah. Okay, believing in the existence of such facts would at most lead to an epistemological problem. Yeah, so if there are a fact about what's being said, then you have the epistemological problem about what other people mean. Since the set of available or even called possible evidence is poor, there will always be rival translations which all equally capture the facts about what the speaker means by her utterances. We as translators always face a choice, but the problem can be weakened by sticking to some one method of translation. Doja says, I'm not sure that I would agree with the arbitrary of the axioms tested over time, depending on the area of study. Fair, but there will be multiple axioms that are usable. And to claim that they're all like related to each other would mean that there would be an objective truth, which is very hard to determine. So it may not be arbitrary. That's right, Dojo. But there will be multiple ones of them, and then you could arbitrarily pick between the many theories. So there's still something arbitrary there, even if not all the axioms are arbitrary. They aren't true, but they are truthy. Well, you could say they're all true in this world, but there's multiple ones and they don't all intertranslate. So like there are multiple true theories and they're true within their own like sort of way they understand the world, but the two truths in the two different theories, the two different models, aren't going to be compatible. So yeah. The interpreter's job would merely be to keep track of such fine-grained facts about what the speaker means by her utterances. As Davidson puts it, just as endless sets of numbers allow us to keep track of the same complex structures in the world, so our sentences can be used in endless different ways to keep track of the attitudes of others and what they mean, end quote. This claim, however, is what Quine's indeterminacy thesis rejects. His reason was that you see, quote, you quote, see language naturalistically, and you have to see the notions of likeness of meaning as simply nonsense, and he has always been faithful to this claim. From a factualist about fine-grained meanings, we expect an endorsement of only an epistemological problem similar to that of underdetermination, since for her there are facts about what the speaker means by his words. She does not need to be worried about skepticism about the reality of meaning or meaning facts because of her factualism has already ruled out the claim that there is indeterminacy. Otherwise, she would be endorsing both that there are facts about meaning and that there are no such facts. Doger says the axiom of choice is obviously true, the well-ordering principle is obviously false, and who can tell Zorn's lemma? Old math jokes are all equivalent. Yeah. This is what we get. It's like, yeah. And, I mean, this goes back to how people, like, see things and define things. They see things different. And this is one of the reasons I, like, Frege was criticizing Kant, is that you can have different people see things different ways. Like, you're saying axiom of choice, and then, like, Zorn's lemma, and people don't realize it's the same thing. And so people can view the world differently at different times because their knowledge states and beliefs are different. And so he's saying, look, it can't just be that the concepts determine the world because the way we individually view the world, like when you realize the two things are equivalent, then you have learned something. So it's not so clear that the concepts just determine the world, because the concepts themselves are tied up with our knowledge, states, and beliefs. Yep. Okay, Davidson has conceded such a factualist view when he states that different assignments of objects can capture all the relevant information about a situation without compromising the truth or reality of the situation. For him, the same is true about alternative translations of the speaker's utterances. Because of that, his arguments of conceptual relativism can take off. All languages are intertranslatable, though we may face the epistemological problem of underdetermination. This just implies that for him there is no such thing as indeterminacy of translation, but then he declares that he accepts the indeterminacy of translation too. He insists strangely that indeterminacy does not entail that there are no facts of the matter. And that was a quote. He continues, quote, Quine's point has actually been that there is no more to the identification of meanings than is involved in capturing these complex empirical relations. This can sound like a negative thesis, and it is. It is an attack on the idea that meanings can be captured in exactly one way. End quote. For Davidson, Quine's indeterminacy at most implies that there is always more than one way of capturing meaning facts. Quine never thought so. He did not think that all languages in the sense can be considered to be in any philosophically interesting way intertranslatable. Note that for Davidson, languages are intertranslatable not because we can choose among rival translations on the basis of some pragmatic criteria. This is a claim that Quine would have no problem to endorse while holding on to the indeterminacy thesis. Davidson's controversial claim is that such languages are intertranslatable because there are facts of the matter about meaning, that is, because indeterminacy does not threaten the existence of such facts. Therefore, because of having such a factualist view in the background, he feels free to take the principle of charity to play a constitutive role in rendering the problem to an epistemological one. This is a claim that Quine has every reason to resist, nor does Quine agree with the comparison Davidson draws between the existence of alternative translations and the existence of different scales of measuring temperature, weight, and the like. Fahrenheit and centigrade temperatures are linear transformations of the other, as Davidson puts it. So are alternative translations. The reason why Davidson denies that the indeterminacy has any ontological consequences, I believe, lies in such an implicit endorsement of the factualism about fine-grained meanings, the view that Quine is hostile to. Yeah, so this is the whole fucking point right here. This is everything that the whole paper, the whole paper is this one line. Davidson denies the indeterminacy has ontological consequences, I believe, lies in such an implicit endorsement of factualism about fine-grained meanings, a view that Quine is hostile to. Like, they said this early on, and this is what they're coming back to. Again, this was the whole deal, that there was factualism, and one man's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. So if you think there is a factual, like, there's a fact of the matter in meaning, then you're with Davidson. If you don't, then you're with Quine in this discussion. This forms the root of Davidson's view of Quine as the one who still holds on to the alleged unjustified content-scheme dualism. I have tried to show why Davidson is not justified in making such a claim about Quine. As the last point, one may wonder why Quine in 1990 states that Don understands my views and our agreements run pretty deep. It looks as if even Quine himself failed to see Davidson's misinterpretation of his view. I think the answer has its roots in Quine's false belief that Davidson agrees with him on the claim that the only facts that exist with regard to translation and meaning are facts about behavioral dispositions of the speaker to assent and dissent. Nonetheless, Davidson already dramatically departed from Quine by including facts about fine-grained meanings in the set of all facts about the world. The later Quine, in Commensurability in Alien Mind, makes his opposite view very clear. What qualifies it a translation of language as successful? That it determines an English equivalent for every native sentence, an empty answer. The real test of a manual of translation is simply successful communication, and the test of successful communication is the smoothness of dialogue and the success in negotiation. End quote. It is an empty question for Quine to ask what really determines meanings or correct translations. There are no such things to determine. All we are left with are pragmatic criteria such as smoothness of dialogue and success in negotiation. Failures in translation, once seen from the Quinean perspective, are local and philosophically uninteresting. As the later Quine puts it, failure of translatability is humdrum, and that it is not necessarily an obstacle to explanation and successful communication. End quote. Davidson, who believes that there are facts as to what someone who speaks any language means by our words, thinks that the only problem to deal with here is at the end an epistemological problem. This rules out the possibility that languages may fail to be, as a matter of fact, and not merely in practice, translatable into each other. The early and later Quine both deny this. Quine does not commit to any third dogma of empiricism. This is rather a dogma that the factualist Davidson unjustifiably accuses the non-factualist Quine of holding onto by overlooking the metaphysical background of Quine's naturalistic philosophy. Okie dokie. Time to rate this, if anyone is still awake. So, wow. It looks like something broke on my local chat here, so I can't even see my own emotes. But here's what we do. Now you get to do an emote raid review. Your awake is not present. It happens, of course. So you see the emotes in chat below. Feel free to spam some emotes that describe how you feel about the paper. If this was fun, yeah, Nog Knife. This was analytic philosophy. So if this was fun, made your brain dance, give it a brain dance. If you thought it discussed existential or artistic drama, Nog Stream. Nog Ouroboros for deep ancient ideas, Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments. So this is what it was. There was a lot of argumentation here and like history to like pick apart what it was going on. Then there's Nog Navel, navel gazing only for academics. Nog Turd, all style no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch and the vote meh, which is mine. Note that I do calculate an overall score for this. If any of the emotes in the green will make the overall score go up, any of the ones in red will make the overall score go down, and the vote meh actually makes it go to the middle. Okay, so we got a Energy gave it a brain dance and a yay. Energy Diameter likes their analytic philosophy. Unfortunately, I didn't really catch enough to appreciate and give an honest review. That's fine. Nog Navel from Dojo Drummer. And Nog What from Rod Durden, which is fair. Laughing can only say vote meh. Yeah, so in my opinion, if you care about this shit, this was good. Like this is like very academic-y things between Davidson and Quine. There's an argument between Davidson and Quine. This author went through Davidson's arguments and Quine's positions and showed, according to the author, that Davidson misrepresented or misunderstood Quine, and Quine was in a much better position and understood like the sort of the scope of the arguments better. You always leave here knowing less than when you got here. That's always great. Yeah. Hey, the goal in some sense in philosophy, going back to Socrates, is to realize how little we know of things. Like, you have a wider wisdom, an understanding of the world, you know factually less. You're like, oh, I thought I understood something. Now I understood how little I knew about it. So, Dogo says, do you think the author was fair to Davidson in his criticism, though? The problem is, I don't know enough history of Davidson. I will say that one quote that I indicated that Davidson was saying sounded really fucking weird, and the author did too. Granted, the author had set us up to feel that way, but that was a weird quote. Like, it really seemed to overstep the bounds of underdetermination and indeterminacy. So, yeah. Ross says, I always learn more about what I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Fucking keyboard typing having... Yeah. It happens. So what am I going to say? Like, this is just... I can't, unless you're interested in this shit, I would never recommend this stuff. Like, you have to want to know the differences, the arguments between Davidson and Quine. Who wants to know the arguments between Davidson and Quine? People who care about Davidson and Quine. Who cares about Davidson and Quine now? Lots of people, but mostly academic philosophers, linguistics-oriented people. But, it's like, is this important? I don't know. But, and like I was saying, this is a big debate if you care about this stuff. And it's interesting if you care about this stuff. But, So, I'm going to have to give it, a whole bunch of Nog Navels, really. Because I can't see how, oh, wow. Not working because, jeez. Give it 2 of those. And, it wasn't bad. They did a good job. But you're going to get some Nog Knives, too. Nog Knife. You can get some 3 Nog Knives, because this is, hardcore, analytic. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel. It's navel gazing but analytic. Will these questions not be relevant for LLMs? So you gotta think, the LLMs, they're going to be on Quine's side here because there's gonna be translations, but there's no like okay, so think about this, energy. The LLMs are trained on, say, Reddit texts. Is there any determinate meaning? Is there a fact about what the Reddit texts mean? No, not really. I mean, that's all we ever have. Like, you guys got chat, you hear what's coming out of my mouth, but there's no like fixed fucking meaning there. There's no fact of the matter. So it's like, yeah, you could say, all right, look, you want to be more Quinean in general because the LLMs there is no fact of the matter about like what this text means. It's only looking at it in terms of like, predictive what comes next as like likely to come next word given the previous words. So it's like, yeah, so you're going to be like, all right, sure, you can apply these concepts to it, but again, it's just like, all right, if you think there is a determinate meaning, maybe there is, but then you take the Davidsonian picture. If you don't think so, then you take the Quinean picture. But as Quine was saying in the end, it's practical and pragmatic, which is exactly what the LLM is doing. So it's like, yeah, this is sort of in the background of what the LLM is up to, but this is why it also hallucinates, is because it's not going for any fact of the matter. It's not Davidsonian trying to hit one real true meaning of the words. Well, it says the good part is that the next time I hear this stuff, you'll recognize it. Yeah, I mean, that's part of like philosophy and like a lot of complicated things. You hear it, you don't understand it. Then the next time you start putting a few of the concepts together, it's how you get into any discussion or area, really. Dogma says sometimes when someone's like misses the distinction, there's an underlying possibility that distinction isn't really felt by the responder to be significant. Yeah, and that's what the question about, was this fair to Davidson? And I don't know. So it's like, yeah. Dogma says the LMs prefer Kantian arguments. They just don't like coming up with some answer. The Kantian hangover continues. True. Dennett was influenced by these arguments, and I enjoy Dennett. Yeah. I mean, this is a lot of 20th century philosophy is like wrapped up in these discussions. Absolutely.